Excellent. Welcome to the TED Summit Innovators. I'm really proud to introduce Paul Golding. Sorry, I've known Paul for must be coming up on 2 decades now. Must be close to that. Paul, we were focused on mainly sort of mobile apps, dev community when we first met, but AI was always something he was talking about. So really, this is one of the people who've been working in this space for longer than most. So Paul, thank you so much and welcome to the TED Summit podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you. And of course, we have Johnny here. Johnny, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great. I'm on a podcast with Paul Golding. We finally got a bona fide expert that's been doing this for 30 years. He can help answer some of the questions of my novice understanding of AI other than the financial trillion-dollar grift that's going on. So to have somebody like Paul, I mean, I've been consumed with reading his work, and you've been talking about him and getting all excited about this podcast, and I had canceled a lot of things to make sure I was here. So it's exciting for me to finally have somebody on the podcast that is indisputable, one of the kings and foremost experts on all things AI. So I don't know if we have enough time or he's going to want to throw me off the show today, Paul, but I'm excited and honored to be here with Paul.
So we'll start from the top down. So one of the things that you've said many times, Paul, is you see you have an important role in helping determine what signal versus noise around this general topic. So I'm interested, what are the important signals that you see out there today?
Well, it's more perhaps easier to characterize the noise.
Go for it.
That allows me to set up a more useful description of the signal.
Oh, okay, go. Yeah, I understand. I agree.
So we can broadly think of AI as having these two, I would guess, realms. There is what you might call classical AI, for want of a better description, and then there's the everything LLMs onwards.
Yeah.
And what has happened is that there's some unique, I think, coincidences that have created a singular moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that singular moment is such that it is disruptive, but in ways that, are both positive and negative.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happened is that I think what's unique, and because we've been around long enough, we've been through all these waves of technology from the web onwards.
Yeah.
And I was also quite actively involved in blockchain, if I might.
Yes.
I don't know if I should put my hand up about that or not. It wasn't crypto; it was blockchain.
Yeah.
And at the time when blockchain was out, I thought that was an astounding velocity because there was I was tracking the commits to GitHubs around blockchain projects, and also the applications for patents.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an unprecedented, I would say, velocity.
Yeah.
But that's nothing in comparison with what we now have with AI.
Yeah.
And one of the things about AI where I think there is noise that almost presents itself as signal is that because of the nature of these foundation models, they provide a basis around which the entire research and technical community can gather.
Yeah.
And this results in a huge flourish of research papers, which look convincing because they're from good establishments, and and maybe we'll touch on the grift aspect of publishing papers. I'm not sure if it's part of the $1 trillion grift. I don't have a number.
Yeah.
It's the base of the $1 trillion grift. What do you mean? Here, look here. Read this. I don't really want to read that. What does it mean? What does it say?
Well, it could be, yeah. But so the point I wanted to make was that obviously everyone wants a slice of the action and wants to be seen relevant, and so research papers come out, every minute practically in AI.
Yes. Yeah.
and they gather a lot of attention through blogs, and then, you know, if they're really noteworthy, they get picked up by journalists who then publish. I don't know if they are actually journalists, but the people who write for Business Insider and these kinds of things that kind of like pick up on some of the, you know, some aspects of these stories, and it gives the impression of a velocity that's not actually there.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? Well, there's a huge difference between the benchmarks and the way you can measure progress in the, let's call it, academic research software world versus the real progress with that technology inside of an enterprise.
Yeah.
And my main interest is enterprises, although I have done some real research into the benefits for small businesses, or actually what's called micro businesses, you know, 0 to 5 people.
Yeah.
Because there's a kind of notion that maybe AI can run their small business for them, and there's some credibility to that, but we can get into that.
Yeah.
So these benchmarks, the number one thing to understand is they hardly ever translate, you know, with parity into productivity improvements in the organization.
Yeah.
So the big myth, I think, that is peddled, and it's hard to find any good research that backs up these productivity claims. I was working with one company doing AI strategy, and more or less, you know, so, and this was more product focused. What's the future of your industry? Where's it going with AI? And in the work I was doing was kind of overridden by the executive team who had heard this snippet that, developers using AI can be 400% more productive. Which, you know, when you think about it, that means, you know, you need 4 engineers can be replaced by 1 using AI.
Yeah.
Now you'd have to like be a little bit strange in the head, I think, to believe such a claim, because if you take anything in the history of technology in the enterprise, we've never seen these kinds of productivity gains ever.
Testing.
And there's actually theoretical reasons, I believe, why you can't. But it's hard to find good research into what, if you were to posit, like, you know, if you had this magical technology, what might the ceiling of productivity improvement be?
Yeah.
It's hard to find good research, because a lot of the research in what you might call operations, you know, management, from where we got this term disruption once from Clayton Christensen and his research, Innovator's Dilemma. It's hard to find good research that suggests how an organization actually works. And unless you know how they actually work, as opposed to some theory of how they work, and most theories are rooted in old mechanistic ideas from the factory era, believe it or not. You cannot really posit how you're going to use AI to transform a whole enterprise. And what I mean by that is, if you look at these sci-fi movies, like one of my favorites is Minority Report, where Tom Cruise is waving his hands. And so I've done research into what that kind of system might look like on the back end in the UC Berkeley incubator.
Oh, cool.
And it's not easy. That kind of system is a million miles away from putting an LLM in a company. So these productivity gains, I think, is where there's a lot of the noise, and the noise is driven by, you know, all of these benchmarks, and, you know, yesterday the model could speak, you know, 100 languages. Today it can speak 1,000 Swahili, and so people translate that into, they think we ought to see productivity gains. That's driven by pressure that I would say you guys perhaps know more about than I. That what I've noticed is that there is no company this time around who isn't pressured the executive team into having something to say about Gen AI.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so they're doing it whether they have a good strategy or not. And many of them have not understood that it still is the case of garbage in, garbage out. So
Yeah.
whilst it's not true to say that you must have a data strategy to have an AI strategy, that would be a sort of generalism, but there is some truth in it.
Correct.
And many organizations are a mile away from, being able to sprinkle the LLM magic dust and see these huge productivity gains.
Exactly. I mean, a good example that isn't AI related is the pressure Ericsson found itself under with activist investors to make an investment in CPaaS to basically get some kind of telecom API capability, because it closed down its old one API stuff, and it spent 3x on Vonage and has had to write it down multiple times after. So even though it's not AI related, it is, in terms of technology adoption, massively overpaid, and then only a couple of years later is writing down that asset. And
two days ago, you had the market lose $1.9 trillion in one day.
Yes.
Right. Out of that 1.9 trillion, 1.2 trillion, NVIDIA down 325 billion.
Yeah.
Billion, not 2-3 billion Ericsson. Billion, Apple down 300 billion, Google 200 billion, Amazon 135 billion, Microsoft 125 billion, Meta down 80 billion, Tesla down 60 billion. All AI hyped companies lost that in one day. And I think, although some is starting to climb back, I think the market is tired and weary, because I think, to what Paul is saying, is people's expectations of where AI is and what it's going to do and it's going to solve everything today are possibly decades off. Maybe I'm wrong, Paul. Maybe you want to answer that. But I think that speaks to what you're saying, Paul, is people don't understand it. Mm-hmm. And I know 76% of Fortune 1000 companies don't even have a strategy, but need to have one. So do you find yourself talking to a lot of these companies and these corporations and these people trying to get answers? Or where are you sitting in the ecosystem? Because I see what you're doing here with your company and some of the things. Where are you sitting in the ecosystem with your expertise and your background? And obviously, blockchain, I'd love to talk to you about that, because I don't even think blockchain has scratched the surface yet. I think that's not even yet come. No. I think crypto has been damaging to blockchain, but that's a conversation I'd love to have you offhand. I think agree. Gave blockchain a bad name, and the truth is everything should be on the blockchain, but that's another conversation. So
I was, I mean, it's a good question. So I guess since we're within the framework of truth telling, I consider myself a truth teller, and in defense of that, most of my career for the last 2 decades has been in consulting. And so I come into companies, and typically I bring an independent view, and I have no interest in their political machinery or career ladder climbing and things like that. So I don't have to say things just to toe the line.
Yeah.
And also I do believe, as has been the case, that has been learned in enterprise selling, that what they found is in enterprise selling that the method du jour is called the challenger method, in that, this relationship building and just schmoozing people, the best salespeople were the ones who told the truth and challenged the client into thinking into new possibilities. Yeah. So I see that as my job. But my challenge has been, if I'm being honest, everyone is interested in AI. Everyone claims they're an expert, and then in large companies, in enterprises, you always have this very thick middle management layer who can kind of call the shots, and many of them want to be AI experts, or they want to be in on the AI further. And so they actually often do not want genuine experts anywhere near the project.
Yes.
because they'll promise things that just sound, absurd, and then there's the kind of almost FOMO effect,
Yeah.
or and driven by this pressure that I've not seen before. That typically I've gone in and I'm always on the front edge of a new wave, and I have to do a lot of convincing of some executive, and I always do get sponsored by someone on the CTO or the CEO, because usually I'm asked to come in and rethink how the company can use technology to find a new meaning or direction.
Yeah.
So often, like with blockchain, I had to do a lot of work to convince even fintech companies that there was something there. Although largely it didn't come off as an apparatus like I was proposing. It became this crypto grift.
Yeah.
Which stopped the genuine interest in
Yes.
blockchain that should have been there.
Yeah.
But AI is the first time where you don't have to convince anyone to look at it, because they're already being told often by their board or their investors, what's your AI story?
Yeah.
And in many cases, it leans towards these absurd productivity gains, because people perceive, we can do twice as much with half the people. In my experience, this do more with less moniker that is very much loved by managers is a myth.
Yeah.
You can only do less with less.
Companies are taking advantage of it. They're using it as an excuse. I don't want to name a couple of companies that are actually using, I have AI, I need less people. And it's a way of really reaping more profits. It's a way for companies and large corporations that I see as I watch some of these publicly traded companies. It's, we dropped this many people. Well, because of more productivity AI. I mean, I can literally start blistering into people. And look, the truth is never a good thing, is it? The truth, our show, Truth in Telecoms, which, is the biggest show in telecom. I mean, we've had 20,000 subscribers listening to us, which is like 1 billion in telecom because it's a small industry. But it's fascinating what you're saying as far as talking to the middle managers, which I painfully know all too well. That is where companies cease to exist. So the middle manager's only job is getting to tomorrow, is getting past there, not being seen, hiding, trying to push the buck. Maybe they'll go a different direction. They're really the destruction of companies, middle management. So you get brought in by CTOs and CEOs. It's happening. It's happening in telecom. I watch it happening. The reason we have spam in this country is because the mobile operators have middle management running and trying to solve problems, which is basically stopping a robocall and a spam text. They can't do it because they're trusting the ecosystem, which makes money on it. So they're letting criminals run the ecosystem and then saying, "Oh, we don't know." When the truth is, think about the things that we can do. Spaceships going to Mars. You can't stop a robocall and a spam text. You can. They don't want to, but middle managers, you put me into a tiff on that one, because they are the destruction of companies. The same people that you're talking about.
Yeah, because it's interesting. Stroller, we did an interview with them, and they use AI, but it's to help the salespeople be more effective. So for them, it's a software tool that has an incremental improvement. And because they're doing it before their competitors, it gets them basically, greatest business success. So it's not 400%, it's like a 10% thing. So that leads me to, where do you see, I agree, the productivity claims are absurd, but where do you think tools are being applied today? And having a business impact?
Well, I might argue not in sales. Again, I'm answering in the negative here. I'll come to real examples in a minute. But I mentioned sales because I think it's one of the most there have been many companies putting AI on the tin for
Yes.
sales for a long time.
Yes.
And as you know, there's always a market for anything that can promise more sales.
Yes.
And so there's a huge amount, and I've looked at this in some depth, and that's how I knew about challenger selling. Although I'm a trained spin seller, which is I think there was the flavor of the month in the 2000s or something.
Correct. Yes, I did the
course. Before it became MedPick or Medic, and now Challenger, and now Gen. I don't know what the new one will be. AI sales.
Yeah.
But there is interesting aspects to that. So I don't think anywhere there's good data to suggest that there's been significant improvements. What happens is that in this case in particular, the data hygiene is everything.
Yes.
And what I think is more useful is if I generalize that to a broader point that anyone from any industry can relate to. The characteristic of using these models, in particular, I'm talking now large language models or foundation models, is and there's technical reasons we could discuss, and there's some good papers on this, but let's just describe it in a more understandable framing, which is that they're very difficult to get them to focus on rare events, rare information. So in many industries, because of, let's say, a digital transformation, or more broadly, digitization, their processes are already fairly well optimized. And what will make a difference, so let's take for a salesperson, they want a unique insight which they can trust is actually going to open the door or win the deal or enable you to renew your contract, et cetera, et cetera. What tends to happen when you deploy these models, especially in a naive fashion, so with very little tuning, and we'll get to evaluations in a minute, because that's actually, I think, nearly everything.
Yes.
What tends to happen is they... the heroes come in and they deploy the system. It looks great because it does this magic of, and it does look magical, I have to say. And maybe it has some good answers, but it tends to tell people what they already know. Yeah. And in particular in salespeople tend to be very, they would argue, I know the customer best. Now, there might be some legitimacy to that, because one of the interesting things about AI is at what point do you dispense with heuristics, rules of thumb, gut feel, and you switch to data. Often that requires a cultural shift, which is absent. So in many sales organizations, there's actually an inherent distrust in data-driven sales. Because everyone has been using something like Salesforce or some CRM, and these things often suffer this kind of descent into chaos where the data's not up to date. Someone adds a new field, and there's 10 million fields. Which are the fields I'm supposed to follow? And data hygiene and quality becomes an issue. Now, if you take that as your base, the LLM is not going to do much for you. And I can argue why technically, and you can demonstrate this technically. But the people running these projects don't believe that. They've drunk the Kool-Aid of these bizarre reports. It's interesting when to go back to the 400% claim for developers. Well, when GitHub actually published some research. And I'd say, they maybe have some good data with Copilot. I think the number was like 29% or thereabouts.
Which is still good.
And even then you have to I know. All that matters, I come from a signal processing chip design background. All that matters is throughput. It's like if you do something in the middle super fast, but you still have to wait down the line, then
Yes.
you haven't gained anything. It's just
Exactly.
like rushing to the next red light in the traffic. And actually, that's the reality of many AI deployments. You're just rushing to the next red light.
Yeah.
But also, I'm really curious about how they measure these things. You know, they come up with these two significant figures. Like it wasn't 29%; it was 29.45%. You know, which is immediate red flag.
Yeah.
And then leave aside that most people don't know how to read studies and understand, statistical analyses, which can be very easily fixed.
Yes.
And often are. And most of these industrial reports, they don't give you the raw data, so you can't confirm
Exactly
the findings.
Yes.
But in general, when you deploy these models, the real productivity gains that you want in what I might call the knowledge management world are rare, relatively rare insight. Otherwise, by definition, it's not an insight.
Correct.
And so I looked into another industry where they had trained a model on a risk model to assess risk for certain types of project. Okay. They trained it on 100,000 projects. So your initial reaction would be, you know, if you're being impressed by numbers, is, oh, this is going to be some magic, you know. But what happened is that they had given that tool to some early beta customers who were in the audience of a webinar where they were presenting the tool. And long story short, what most of them were saying is, well, it's just telling me things I know are obviously a risk.
Yeah.
So there's no insight there. Maybe it's doing it in a nicely packaged way. I don't have to go and look at a dashboard. It's just giving me an answer to a chat. But that's one aspect which I see, you know, is a problem. And it's very easy to deploy these models, exceptionally easy. Yeah. And so much so that I have seen many projects that are run by non-engineers. I would call them, you know, weekend warrior coders, or I don't know what the expression is. Not that I'm berating that, but that's I'm just making the point that that's all you need to get one of these things going.
Yeah.
Now, many of these systems where I just throw in all my documents and I can ask questions, the so-called RAG solution.
Yeah.
If you look at the actual technical data, they don't perform very well.
Correct.
Without some kind of attention to some detail.
Yeah.
Now, that detail often requires a technical insight, which is beyond the capacity of the weekend warrior or even the average, you know, software engineer.
Correct.
And so that's when these projects stop delivering, and then, you know, the management will say, well, what's going on? Where's the magical productivity gains? And then I believe that you can drag out that process of claiming, oh, we'll use the latest model, or you can drag that out for years and actually never achieve anything.
Yeah.
And that was seen with big data and a lot of other waves.
Yes.
So, but the technology, I would say, is more useful when you combine large language models with a more classical machine learning algorithm, which the reason machine learning is more important, or should be, than it used to be, because most of the ideas are not that new.
Yeah.
They come from sort of classical statistical learning.
Exactly.
The reason it's more useful to consider these methods are two reasons. One is we do have more data.
Yeah.
And it is easier, generally speaking, to instrument, to get measurements from a system.
Yeah.
And because of the open source nature of technology these days, it's relatively easy to find an appropriate model that if you throw your data into it, it will get good results. Most of the Kaggle competitions, which is this crowdsourced machine learning community, are often won by models that are like XGBoost, these tree
Yes.
decision models
Exactly.
that are extremely powerful. And if you have the data and you can prepare it in the right way, then you can get good results. And the second reason you might consider that is the increase in computational availability.
Yes. Yeah.
With GPUs or just cloud compute, elastic compute.
Yeah.
So there's probably a lot of things that you can do if you know where to look to optimize business processes, and then use the large language model as some kind of supervisory or orchestration motif. But even then, you have to be careful, because the issue with the LLMs is that they have this distortion lens of seeing the world through the probabilities of different words occurring, out in the world.
Exactly.
And this actually does have a real impact. And I'll give you an example. Large language models, it turns out, can perform these things called rotating ciphers, which is like a Caesar cipher. You just move the letter A along 5, and an A becomes an F or an E or whatever. They're particularly good, I think, at rotating 13 ciphers. And it gives the illusion, they can do rotating ciphers. But the reason it's good at the rotating 13 is, so it turns out, this is used a lot on quiz websites to obfuscate answers. So it's learned it because it's seen it often. Now, when you ask it to do a rotating 17 cipher, it understands. I use that word reservedly. It understands conceptually what's going on and can attempt it, but will make mistakes. So wherever you get this coincidence of the subject matter is rare, or it has not seen it that often in the training data, it struggles to perform. Marry that with my earlier point that where you really want AI to be powerful is to shine a spotlight on unusual or rare things or anomalous conditions. I've done a lot of work recently in anomalies, and I think that a lot of the classical techniques are probably going to get you a lot further. But because computation, let's say, is free, I mean, it's not, of course, true. You could potentially consider using an ensemble, a basket of techniques. To do things, to see patterns in your data you previously couldn't see, and then package that up and make sense of it through an LLM. But that requires the first step, at least some expertise in data science. So you're now away from this, just use a few lines of code. And it's not long in any of these fields before you run into a problem. It doesn't perform as expected, and the abstractions of just understanding how it works in principle, LLMs just guess the next word, no longer serve you well. You need to actually know what's happening mathematically or under the hood.
No, that's great insight. Because we were just chatting with Lyle Pratt, who's founded a company, Vida, and it's a simple AI agent. And where he's applying it to is small businesses like tree services, plumbers, people that can't answer the phone when people are calling. But guess what? Put an agent in there and can answer all the basic stuff, and get it moved to a point whereby he's either got a site visit, the customer's been given a basic quote or services, stuff's got answered, so that when he's calling them back or they're calling him again, it's to actually move the deal forward, rather than, it's calling in the evening and then it's telephone tag and all the rest of it, which still exists today. But again, he's using OpenAI or proprietary AI, if you want to call it, because it's good enough. It solves the problem for that very specific segment. And then, what I would say in my, because I've known Lyle since Better Voice, over a decade ago, and what he does is he has great tech, self-built, and then he always solves that go-to-market. So it's not just having this bit of tech, it's how we package it, price it, and deliver it in a way that's easy for the small business to implement and solve the problem that they're facing. So it's that whole sort of solution piece. I'm seeing success. So I just want to. So I'm not countering. I'm just saying, it's constraining the problem to make it dumb and simple enough that some of the aspects of an LLM can work. But again, it's highly constrained. If you're taking a more general problem and trying to identify like rare circumstance or rare, data, then, because you just fed the internet into that LLM. So of course, it's going to give you the most generic, dumb advice possible. It's like when I see on LinkedIn, somebody's using OpenAI to write something. It's horrible language. It's you just see it as like, no, you're telling me nothing. You've written a paragraph that's just bubbles, But let's take it back. Just two things I want to wrap up on because we're getting long on time. And
I just want to jump in real quick, Alan, because a couple things. I sent you a quick story on AI turnoff. Tech customers are apparently getting bored of smart devices. It's basically a study in Washington on how it's turning off people. People are afraid when they see AI in something. It's turning them away from sales. It's just an interesting story. I wanted to ask Paul for a favor. Paul, I never met you before other than today. I'm a big fan. I've done some research. I'd like you to come back on a Truth in AI with me and really look at this from a market perspective. I'd like to put a bunch of public companies up there for you and have you kind of analyze it. Because I think, look, that's a big target, a big part of our market and our audience has been Wall Street. And they kind of went away because we stopped talking about stocks and stuff. So I want you to do us a favor and come on and let's take people to school on Wall Street on what's really AI, what's valuable, what's not, and who's full of it. So I'm going to ask you that question, and then I'm going to leave if it's possible for you to come back. I'm not really giving you an opportunity to say no. So I expect you to come back, Paul, and because I think your brilliance, it needs to be tapped for the financial world, because real people are getting really hurt by making investments, by not understanding what they're investing in. So our whole thing here at Truth to Telecoms is we don't like spammers, we don't like scammers, we don't like criminals. And if you could help us educate some of our community on, hey, don't make that bet over there. Here's why. I think it would be great for our community. And I want to thank you. And I have to.
Yeah, no problem. We'll see you again soon, Johnny.
See you.
Cool. So just check that. It's okay that we do another one sometime in the next month or so and we can go through the list of companies beforehand. So it won't be any surprises in there, but that'd be okay.
I guess so. I'm not an expert in companies, but
no. But we'll cycle round to get to it, so it's where it makes sense for you. But that'll be good because I guess the LinkedIn post you just did on evaluation tools. Maybe we'll just wrap up on that, and maybe provide a quick intro and why you see them as being so critically important.
Yeah. So the models are extremely powerful. I mean, absolutely stunningly so. And so we should, make this clear that there are things that they can probably do that we just haven't thought of yet.
Yes.
I'm a big believer in creativity. And I think there's lots of interesting possibilities with these models. However, the challenge that people are running into, and I would say all of the current emerging skepticism that we've seen in some companies supposedly have now dropped the use of these co-pilots.
Yep.
Or they're saying, they produce, I think one comment was they produce middle school grade presentations or.
That's right.
Well, we could talk about whether the presentations were high school to begin with, but
yeah.
The issue is that the models have this sort of probabilistic nature.
Yes.
So why? Because that's the nature of language. Descartes himself was baffled that we could talk at all, because when he figured out the number of permutations and novel sentences, he wondered how it was that the brain could handle such computations effortlessly as we apparently do, and which remains a mystery, I think, to many. So the models are extremely powerful, and couple that with the fact that they're very easy to get going with and to deploy. And a lot of people have found this common pattern: we just put some prompt and it seems to understand. Now, and actually, I want to connect this to your use case, if I may, in a minute. Please. About small businesses. And why these, and also back to our telco origins, why these devices like the AI pin are problematic. Or the rabbit, or what have you.
Oh God, yes.
So they look impressive, but you have to consider the following: when you deploy a chatbot in the field, people can type in whatever they want.
Yes.
Because of the nature of language. Whereas a point and click UI, you're constrained by whatever affordances the UI designer has given the user.
Exactly.
Now, the fact that you can type in anything, I don't know what law it would be called, Sod's law. There must be some equivalent of that. People will type in anything.
Yes.
And I mean, even things like, you give them a bot that it can improve their sales, and they might still type in, what time, who won the 100-meter, Olympics.
Yeah, exactly.
That actually happens. Why? Because the mental model is that you've given them Chat GPT now inside the whatever thing that you've packaged it in.
Yes.
So people have already quite quickly attuned to the sort of general knowledge, oracular capabilities of these bots, which is a unique use case.
Yes.
And in one in which we are very tolerant of errors, but we don't notice it. Whereas when you're trying to do a very directed, specific task, the errors become problematic, and they creep in because there's a large distribution of possible inputs.
Yes.
Even the same sentence with the same meaning could be worded in 100 different ways.
Correct. Yeah.
And then the way the models work is that they've got a very large corpus of possibilities to connect words through this state space of words. So you have to test the models. You have to test these things because you don't know what they're going to. Now, the question is, how do you test them? And this is a genuine, I'd say it's the number one challenge in the field. Because the models are already good enough. I mean, they can keep improving these benchmarks. But you still have to answer the question, for your use case, how are you going to make sure that it doesn't make mistakes that are potentially catastrophic? Like in in medical setting, or they're illegal, financial compliance setting. You have to have evaluations, and it's the most overlooked thing.
I agree.
And it's not like doing unit tests in software. If I write a function that multiplies two numbers, it's a very small set of tests will give me 100% test coverage.
Exactly.
And then probably even I can think of all the edge cases if someone puts in the letter A times 3.
Exactly.
Maybe they get three A's out. I don't know.
Exactly.
And they use that as their credit rating in that. So this evaluations is critical. So now they make mistakes, or they produce responses that might not fit the purpose. Let's put it that way. Now we move to this small business and the use case you just gave, and these voice devices and things like that. For me, because I come from mobile background, whereas I've written books and got like a large number of patents in many aspects of mobile device design and applications and ecosystems. It was fairly obvious these things wouldn't work. throwing an LLM into a phone and calling it a new device category. Why? Because when you and I'm a huge user of Claude, ChatGPT, Warp, Perplexity. For me, the personal productivity I get from them is huge. And you know, actually, I should have used that as the signal, maybe. But I tend to think my use cases might be exceptional rather than the norm. But because I'm a heavy researcher, and I found patterns where I can make them work for me to really accelerate my research.
Cool.
But if you notice carefully, they do produce errors. Now, quite frequently, but you'll carry on typing, right? Because you're motivated to get the answer, and you have a belief. Often it is a belief because it turns out not to be true. If I keep going, I'm going to get there quicker than if I went and did the research a more traditional way. But they're making errors, and we're tolerant of them because of the unique context of using one of these knowledge bots or oracular-like bots. But a small business user or a customer who's phoning up and wants to know why you haven't turned up to their appointment, Friday, even though your magic calendar said, AI-powered calendar said, and then, you don't get a convincing answer. Their tolerance of that is almost zero.
Zero, yes.
And so you can very quickly kill a product with these, what look like huge step forward from previous ways of achieving, automation using natural language processing, yet they don't hit the bar of expectation of users under these very specific time-starved, often, no one wants to phone anyone up anymore, let's face it. So there are these unique challenges where the errors here are even more problematic because they can kill your service. So in the enterprise, if you're deploying these models, you really ought to think about where can we find maximum value, where there is still a lot of hands-on human intervention to spot the errors, and find some way of building a lever with the LLM that is tolerant of these limitations. Because I can tell you, I'll give you a very real data point. When prompting became a thing, prompt engineering, a prominent analyst, I won't mention them because it might embarrass them, but they're one of the prominent authors of one of the most prominent AI reports, I would say, on the planet. They said, "Oh, there's no such thing as prompt engineering. It's a fake expertise because the model will solve that." Now, of course, unless the models are capable of telepathy, they'll never be able to solve it.
No.
It's just the nature of communicating with language that there's imprecision, ambiguity, and so on and so forth. So the notion that models will stop making mistakes or hallucinating, or they'll understand perfectly with one sentence what we want, is just completely nonsense.
Exactly.
However, where I would say, and this is where people... I think there is a trick here. You have to kind of like think about structuring your prompts in this sort of pseudo English codey kind of way. And if you take models like Claude, a lot of their models are trained using XML tags. And you and I thought XML. I used to teach XML, I think, in 1996. Or no, maybe it was 2006. I lose track. When it was like, the only way you could configure an enterprise Java system.
Exactly.
It turns out that if you sprinkle the right, XML tags in your prompts, and you sort of think a bit differently about structuring the prompt, you can achieve a much better performance. It doesn't negate the need for the evaluations and the fact that these things are still going to struggle the more you get into the long tail of the distribution where it hasn't seen many examples and it can't reason so well. But these kind of like tricks of fusing XML or maybe JSON with English, those kinds of things seem to work.
Exactly. Yes.
And there are definitely good use cases. And I would say around document processing, there are good use cases. But even there, it doesn't work out of the box. And you probably have to use these methods where you train lots of different, say, the same LLM, but you train it to use a lot of different recipes to find the answer.
Exactly.
Like
And
in a contract.
yes. No, because there's always a need to, in your prompt engineering, to to basically have the escape clause to a human, because there's going to be like one example, and this was when I was chatting with Brian West from SignalWire, is they had certain errors, certain hallucinations where somebody would call in and they'd say particular product isn't available. It is, and they just created the prompts to help narrow the engine down so that it basically, if a certain question was asked, there was a clear guardrails to ensure what were the steps that were taken. Now, it's not going to stop all errors, but again, as you discover them, you basically put the guardrails around so you can avoid the egregious errors, which, as you say, can kill a product.
Well, that's one aspect, but the accuracy is another. So a very popular use case, and even in, actually, interestingly, when I was in the telco world, I was told, if you think this is slow and lacking innovation, go work in the banking world.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But it's interesting to notice how many banks have actually adopted these AI tools quite aggressively, actually.
Yeah.
And some of them even do inventive work, and you can see that in their patent filings.
Yeah.
But a common use case is processing documents, because there's let's loosely speaking, hidden value in the documents.
Yes.
That is too expensive to pay someone to read through them all.
Yeah.
So what you might do is you say, well, I'm going to use a prompt to look at 100,000 documents. Maybe they're their sales contracts, and you want to know, okay, what products does the customer buy from us, under what configuration, and when's the last date of service of the contract.
Yeah.
Now, those things are actually hard to find because they're not standardized, and that you can get SKU explosion in sales. Contracts are written differently, different lawyers come and go, different templates come and go.
Yeah.
So it turns out that if you ask an LLM, look at these documents and tell me the last date of service, its accuracy might be very low, say 30%. I mean, I'm making up a number, but that's not uncommon. Now, what people don't realize is there's maybe 100 different ways that you could train it or ask it to look for the last date of service. And there's a technique now called, with a lot of people are not using, it's basically weak supervision or ensemble learning. Okay. So you have maybe 100 recipes, each of which performs relatively badly. They can only identify 20% of the time, the last date of service of the contract. But when you combine them in some smart way, they become a strong learner. And in unison, they can now identify, 80, 90%. Yeah. And these techniques are very well known in the classical machine learning world. Yeah. Ensemble learning is how all these tree things, random forest work. But again, the lay person who's trying to implement an LLM, but in a few lines of Python code, is not going to be too familiar with these techniques. But so there's two lessons from that. One is the models can do amazing things if you set them up correctly. Yeah. Two is you won't get very far out of the box without some specialist knowledge or understanding. Yeah. And three, you won't succeed in the end if you don't have good evaluations.
Exactly. Cool. That's beautiful to finish on in terms of a simple to-do list when you're looking at these applications. But again, Paul, this was amazing. I learned a lot. I know we rambled on quite a while, but it's because you're teaching me. But I'm really looking forward to you coming back. We'll make sure we get a list together that you feel comfortable with. and I'm sure you and Johnny will go at it hammer and tongs as you do that evaluation. So again, Paul, thank you so much. Speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.